For 6 nights, my roommate left her bedroom door open just a few inches, always at exactly the same hour. I pretended not to notice. I told myself it was nothing, just a strange habit. But on the 7th night, she appeared in the hallway wearing my shirt, her eyes red from crying, and quietly asked me the one question I had never expected to hear from her. Do you still have room for someone who has nowhere else to go? Before we continue, if stories about second chances, unexpected kindness, and people finding their way back to hope touch your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Sometimes a small act of kindness can become the beginning of someone's entire new life. When Emily moved into the apartment, I barely knew her. She was 28, quiet, organized, and almost painfully polite. We had met through a mutual friend after I needed someone to split the rent. She arrived with 2 suitcases, a cardboard box filled with books, and a small plant that looked as if it had already survived several disasters. She smiled when she introduced herself, but there was something distant behind that smile, something guarded. I noticed it, but I didn't ask. We all carry things we don't immediately know how to explain. The first few weeks were peaceful. We divided the groceries, took turns cleaning, and occasionally watched movies in the living room. Emily worked at a small design company and usually came home late. I worked from home, so our schedules rarely matched. We became the kind of roommates who could sit together in comfortable silence without needing to fill every moment with conversation. Then, one Monday evening, I noticed her bedroom door was open. Not wide open. Just a few inches. The hallway light spilled through the gap, creating a thin golden line across the floor. I thought nothing of it. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that. 6 nights in a row. Every night, around midnight, Emily left her door open. Sometimes I could hear her moving around inside. Sometimes there was complete silence. Once, I saw her sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at an old photograph in her hands. I almost asked her if everything was okay. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she quickly put the photograph away whenever she noticed me. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like when someone asked a question before you were ready to answer it. A year earlier, I had lost my father, and during those months, everyone kept telling me to talk. I appreciated their concern, but sometimes all I wanted was for someone to sit nearby without demanding an explanation. So I gave Emily the same space I had once needed. On the 7th night, everything changed. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard slow footsteps behind me. I turned around and froze. Emily stood in the hallway wearing one of my old blue shirts. It was much too large for her, hanging loosely around her shoulders, and she had wrapped a blanket around herself. Her hair was messy, her face pale, and tears were still shining in her eyes. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she looked down at the shirt and apologized. She explained that she had been cold, that she had found it in the laundry basket, and that she hadn't wanted to wake me. But I knew that wasn't the real reason she had come out. She sat at the kitchen table, holding the warm mug I placed in front of her with both hands. For several minutes, she simply stared at the steam. Then she finally told me the truth. 6 weeks earlier, Emily had discovered that the man she had been engaged to had been living a completely different life behind her back. He had drained their shared savings, canceled their wedding plans without telling her, and disappeared after leaving her with debts she couldn't afford. Worse, when she confronted him, he blamed her for everything. She had spent weeks trying to pretend she was fine. She went to work. She smiled at people. She answered emails. She bought groceries. She came home and closed her bedroom door. But every night, the silence became unbearable. The reason she had started leaving her door open was because she was afraid of being alone in the dark. She didn't want to admit it. She was afraid that if she closed that door completely, she would feel trapped inside everything she had lost. I listened without interrupting. Then she told me something that broke my heart. She said she had almost moved out that week because she couldn't afford her half of the rent anymore. She had packed most of her belongings and planned to leave while I was at work. She had nowhere to go. That explained why she had looked so frightened. I remembered my father again. I remembered sitting beside his hospital bed during his final week, pretending I was stronger than I felt. I remembered how much it had meant when a friend simply stayed beside me without asking me to be brave. So I told Emily she didn't have to leave. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not until she was ready. She looked at me as if I had just handed her something much more valuable than money. I told her we could figure out the rent later. We could make a plan. She could find another job if she needed to. She could take as much time as necessary to rebuild her life. For the first time since she moved in, Emily cried without trying to hide it. And I realized something important. Sometimes people don't need someone to rescue them. They simply need someone to remind them that they aren't abandoned. The next morning, everything felt different. Emily made breakfast. It was terrible. The eggs were burned, the toast was nearly black, and the coffee tasted like it had been filtered through a tire. But we laughed. Really laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh like that. Over the next few weeks, small things began changing. Emily started applying for new jobs. I helped her organize her finances. She began going for morning walks. The little plant she had brought with her started growing new leaves after months of looking half dead. One Saturday, she moved it toward the sunlight and smiled. She said maybe some things don't die just because they look like they're finished. I knew she wasn't talking about the plant. Months passed. Emily eventually found a better job. She paid back every dollar she had borrowed from me, even though I had told her she didn't need to rush. She also started volunteering at a community center on weekends, helping women who were rebuilding their lives after difficult relationships. One evening, almost a year after that night, I came home and found her bedroom door wide open. I stopped in the hallway. She noticed me and smiled. Then she said she had finally realized why she had been leaving the door open. She hadn't been waiting for someone to come inside. She had been reminding herself that she was allowed to come outside. That sentence stayed with me. Because sometimes healing isn't dramatic. There isn't always a magical moment when everything becomes perfect. Sometimes healing looks like opening a bedroom door 1 inch at a time. Sometimes it looks like making terrible coffee with someone who refuses to let you give up. Sometimes it looks like wearing an oversized shirt because you were too scared to admit you needed comfort. And sometimes, the person who saves you isn't a stranger or a hero. Sometimes they're simply the person who chooses to stay. Years later, Emily and I still talk about that 7th night. We laugh about the blue shirt, the awful coffee, and the burned eggs. But neither of us jokes about what happened afterward. Because that night taught us both something we had forgotten. A home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's the feeling of knowing that if you open the door, someone will still be there. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may be quietly struggling, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. You never know when your small action might remind someone that they are not alone. And before you leave, comment, "Someone stayed," if you believe that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is simply refusing to walk away. Because everyone deserves a door they can open without being afraid of what waits on the other side.